Hello, my name is Duong-Tran, and today we will be going over the muscular system. Before getting started, we have to know what muscles are. There are three different types of muscles: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Their function: movement, stability, control of openings and passages, production of heat, and blood glucose regulation. This video will be mainly focused on skeletal muscle. We will first go over the components of skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is composed of muscular tissue, connective tissue, nerves, and blood vessels. The deepest of the connective layers would be the endomysium, which surrounds each individual muscle fiber. Next is the perimysium, which groups together muscle fibers in bundles called fascicles. The next layer, the epimysium, surrounds the muscle as a whole. Lastly, the fascia is the outermost layer of the muscle, separating neighboring muscles from each other and from the subcutaneous tissue. There are several shapes of muscles that are determined by the orientation of the fascicles in the perimysium. The first shape is fusiform. These muscles are thick in the middle with tapered ends, making them relatively strong depending on their diameter. Some examples of these muscles are the biceps brachii muscles and the gastrocnemius muscle. The next shape would be parallel, with uniform width and parallel fascicles. Because they have fewer muscle fibers, they are unable to produce as much force. One example of this muscle shape is the rectus abdominis. Another muscle shape is triangular. These muscles are broad on one end and narrow on the other, but are relatively strong due to the many fibers in the wider end. Examples of this muscle shape are the pectoralis major and temporalis muscles. Pennate muscles are said to be feather-shaped. There are three different types: unipennate, bipennate, and multipennate. Examples of these are the semimembranous muscle, rectus femoris muscle, and the deltoid muscle. The muscles that generate the most force would be the multipennate muscles, due to the fact that they can fit the most muscle fibers in a set length. The last shape is circular muscles. Examples of these muscles are the orbicularis oculi muscles and the oris muscle. We will now be covering some of the skeletal muscles in your body. Because there are so many muscles, I will only be covering a few of the major muscles within each group. We will begin with the muscles for facial expression. The orbicularis oculi muscle is responsible for closing your eyes in order to blink. The nasalis muscle is what allows you to flare your nostrils. The zygomaticus major and minor muscles both work to allow you to smile. The buccinator aids in helping you to chew your food. Next, we will move on to the muscles for chewing and swallowing. Any muscle with glossus in the name is referring to the tongue. For example, the hyoglossus depresses your tongue. Your masseter muscle is responsible for elevation of the mandible, which is very important for chewing. The temporalis muscle and medial and lateral pterygoid muscles also aid in helping you chew your foods. Your hyoid bone is used as a landmark for many of the muscles around this region. Some muscles are superior to the hyoid bone, suprahyoid muscles. These are your digastric muscle, geniohyoid muscle, mylohyoid muscle, and stylohyoid muscle. Additionally, there are muscles inferior to the hyoid bone, infrahyoid muscles. These are your omohyoid, sternohyoid, and thyrohyoid, and sternothyroid muscles. All these muscles help you to swallow your food. Additionally, there are muscles that are needed in order to help you turn your head and neck. The sternocleidomastoid muscle is one of these, helping you to flex your neck. Your trapezius and semispinalis capitis help extend your neck and rotate your head. Next, we will move into the muscles for respiration. These muscles consist of your diaphragm and intercostal muscles. These muscles are responsible for inspiration and expiration. The muscles that make up your abdominal wall are your internal and external obliques, transverse abdominal muscle, and rectus abdominis muscles. These muscles are stacked on top of one another to form your abs. The muscles in your back are responsible for extending, rotating, and laterally flexing your vertebral column. These muscles include your latissimus dorsi, trapezius, erector spinae, and quadratus lumborum muscles. Next is the muscles acting on your shoulder. Examples of these are your pectoralis minor muscle, serratus anterior muscle, and rhomboid muscles. There are lots of muscles that help you move your arm. For example, your supraspinatus muscle, infraspinatus muscle, teres minor muscle, and subscapularis muscle all make up your rotator cuff. They all work with the deltoid muscle. Muscles that aid in moving your elbow and forearm are your brachialis, biceps brachii, and triceps brachii muscles. They are in your brachial region. Your brachioradialis, aconius, pronator teres, pronator quadratus, and supinator muscles are all located in your antebrachial region. There are lots of different muscles in order to give us such movable hands. For example, your flexor carpi radialis and ulnaris. Lots of the hand muscles demonstrate what they act upon and how, so these actions are fairly simple to memorize. Any muscle with the word pollicis in it means it is acting upon your thumb, such as the flexor pollicis longus muscle. There are also 3 layers of muscles in the anterior portion of your hands: superficial, intermediate, and deep. On the posterior side, there are only 2 layers: superficial and deep. Next, we will go over some of the muscles in your hips and thighs. For example, your iliacus and psoas major muscles are responsible for flexing your thigh and trunk. Opposite of that, your tensor fasciae latae, gluteus maximus, gluteus minimus, and gluteus medius muscles extend your knee and thigh. Additionally, your adductor brevis, adductor longus, and adductor magnus muscles adduct your thigh. Next is the muscles in your knees and legs. Your quadriceps femoris, rectus femoris, vastus lateralis, vastus intermedius, and vastus medialis all work to extend your knee. On the other hand, your biceps femoris, semitendinosus, and semimembranosus muscles all work to flex your knee. Your muscles in your ankle and foot are similar to your hand in the sense that their names describe their function. For example, your extensor digitorum longus extends your toes. If the word hallucis is in the muscle, it means it's acting upon your big toe. Moving away from what muscles are in your body, we will now be focusing on characteristics of muscle cells. They must have excitability, or responsiveness, conductivity, contractility, extensibility, and elasticity. The plasma membrane of a muscle fiber is called a sarcolemma. The cytoplasm is called the sarcoplasm. This sarcoplasm is filled with protein cords called myofibrils. These are made up of myofilaments, thick filaments, thin filaments, and elastic filaments. Thick filaments are made up of myosin, while thin filaments are made up of actin. Thin filaments are also made up of tropomyosin and troponin, other proteins. Myosin and actin shorten the muscle fibers and are called contractile proteins. Tropomyosin and troponin are regulatory proteins, meaning they determine when muscle fibers can contract and when they can't. Muscular tissue is striated, made up with dark A bands and light I bands. The middle of the A band has a lighter region called the H band. There is also this diagonal line where the thick filaments are linked in a protein complex called the N line. The light I band has a darker Z disc. The segments from one Z disc to the next are called sarcomeres, which are the functional contractile units for muscle fibers. I will now explain how muscles are able to contract. There are 4 major phases of this contraction: excitation, excitation-contraction coupling, contraction, and relaxation. Excitation is when action potentials in the nerve fibers cause action potentials in muscle fibers. This begins with the arrival of a nerve signal through a motor nerve fiber into the axon terminal. This opens voltage-gated calcium channels, allowing calcium ions to enter the terminal. This calcium causes the synaptic vesicles to release acetylcholine into the synaptic cleft. The acetylcholine diffuses across the synaptic cleft and into the acetylcholine receptors, located on the sarcolemma. They bind together, opening the ligand-regulated ion gate. This allows sodium and potassium ions to flow. Sodium rushes into the cell while potassium flows out of it. This creates a less negative voltage on the sarcolemma when sodium enters the cell, but quickly returns it to resting membrane potential as potassium ions exit the cell. This fluctuation is called the end plate potential. This creates the action potential in the muscle fiber, exciting it. The next phase is excitation-contraction coupling. This step is referring to the events that link to action potentials on the sarcolemma to the activation of the myofilaments. The action potential spreads from the motor end plate in all directions. This wave reaches the T-tubules and then continues down into the cell interior. These action potentials open voltage-gated ion channels located in the T-tubules. This opens calcium channels to let calcium ions out of the sarcoplasmic reticulum, down the concentration gradient, into the cytosol. This calcium then binds to troponin on the thin filaments. This causes the troponin-tropomyosin complex to expose the active sites on the actin. They are then available to bind to the myosin heads. The third step is contraction. This is where the muscle fiber develops tension and can shorten. This begins when the myosin head has an ATP molecule bound to it. Myosin ATPase hydrolyzes the ATP into ADP and phosphate. This locks the head into an extended position. This then binds to the active site on the thin filament, forming a cross bridge between actin and myosin. Once the myosin releases the ADP and phosphate, it ceases the extended position and pulls the thin filament down with it. This is referred to as a power stroke. Once a new ATP is introduced, the head will release the actin, breaking the cross bridge. This is called the recovery stroke, preparing the head for another power stroke further down the thin filament. The last step is relaxation, returning the muscle back to its original length. The nerve signals stop arriving at the neuromuscular junction, ceasing production of acetylcholine. The acetylcholine enzyme then breaks existing acetylcholine down into fragments, which are absorbed by the axon terminal for recycling. The sarcoplasmic reticulum stops releasing calcium and only reabsorbs the remaining ions. Lastly, the tropomyosin blocks the active sites on the actin again, causing the muscular fiber to stop creating tension. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you learned a little about the different types of muscles, shapes of skeletal muscles, some major skeletal muscles in your body, and about how muscles contract and relax. Thank you.